back on. I wanted to ask you just about, this was in the 1970s. Had this ever happened? Was there anything like your newscast anywhere?
I don't think anybody was doing, a silly news show. I mean, even a news parody show. I mean, yeah, I don't. It was pre Saturday Night Live originally, and then they came along with their update about a year after us. But again, they weren't doing what they had. It was a whole different ballgame. This was a local station that was presenting its news like this. And I think that was half of the thing. Even when there were nights that we weren't that funny, we were still stupid enough or silly enough that people would go, I can't believe this is their newscast. I think that was the hook. I mean, every station, a crowd. In fact, TV Guide again came back and did a story about local zany hosts. And, they had, Happy the Clown from Cleveland, who hosts the Three Stooges show. And they had so-and-so who does the Midnight Madness horror movies, And then they had me. And so I was lumped in with them, as a crazy show host. And again, back to now it's in a national magazine. The picture they had of me, I was wearing a tin hat that had a cardboard arrow sticking out of the top and mirrored sunglasses on. And it just looked ridiculous. The picture was just ridiculous. And I remember it because I was doing an editorial. Somebody had written in that they didn't think we should be making fun of the news, that the news should be taken seriously, and da-da-da. Well, by this point, I had a lady I was working with as my co-anchor who was equally as silly. Tina Selden was her name. And Tina, I had her intro me, and she's doing this dead seriously. Recently we here at Channel 17 received a letter. We made sure we just said a letter, not letters, a letter saying that we're making fun of the news and not treating it with respect. Here to rebut that letter, or rebut that letter. What is it? Rebut. My voice coach. Anyway, it's actually a puppet. I just reach over there. Anyway, she says to rebut that letter, here is Channel 17's news director, Bill Tush. And they cut to me, and I'm wearing the stupid hat with the arrow and plumes and the glasses. And I'm going, what is this about us doing crazy news? I don't know about that, But I'm wearing this stupid outfit saying we don't do crazy things. And then we supered behind us editorial. We kept spelling it wrong. So it would be crossed out. Then we try another way to spell it. Cross that one out. And I did this whole big dead serious editorial. Well, somebody lifted off the tape, I guess. I don't know where they got a picture. And they put that in the TV Guide. And here's my father, who was so proud of his son back there in Pittsburgh, telling his friends, oh, my son's on television down in Atlanta. He's a newsman, a news anchor on TV. And they're coming up to him saying, hey, Bill, you see your son's picture in TV Guide. I think he hid for a week.
Now,
Yeah.
when the show, when the station went from a small UHF station to satellite, is there anything that you had to do differently? Even
No. In fact, recently they did a story on the history of TBS, and they called me and they asked me basically the same question of, when you went on satellite, did things change? We never even knew we went on satellite. It was crazy. It was a deal that was put together with Ted and some people from Scientific Atlanta. Somehow he got with these folks, and somebody just came up with the bright idea. They said, you ever think about if you put the TV station on a satellite, you could beam it around the country and become national, and then you can sell national advertising, And Ted's like, wow, that's a heck of an idea. And we went on satellite. And I don't recall ever being told. It just happened. And then we started getting letters from all these places. I always remember Bemidji, Minnesota. For some reason, that always cracked me up. What the heck is Bemidji, Minnesota? And they said, oh, we watch your newscast at Bemidji. And then Lincoln, Nebraska, and all these other places, Hawaii. And, saying, oh, we love your news show. And I'm, oh, my God. And, of course, then one thing led to another, and we started doing, the news never changed. The news didn't change. What happened was in 1979, when Ted said, we're going to start a 24-hour news channel. And then he brought in the guy who basically put CNN together, Reese Schoenfeld, who was running a thing called Independent Television News or something out of New York. And he said to Ted, we really can't do the crazy news anymore because we're trying to tell people we're going to be serious. And we went off the air on Friday doing the crazy news. Came back on the air Monday morning live at 6:30, and now I was a serious newsman. And to prove how serious we weren't messing around. Between Friday and Monday morning at 6:30 a.m., we turned our desk upside down and put a new top on it. We were serious. We weren't fooling around because nobody's going to say, hey, that's their old desk turned upside down. No. We fooled them.
Did people think when you started doing the real?
Take me serious.
When you started doing that real news, did people think, oh, this is a put on, and eventually they're going to go back? Did you
I imagine, but it was a sad day of my life because I'm like, I don't want to do serious news.
How much morning did you have before?
Oh, it was overnight, like everything there. We hired a guy one time. Ted came back from somewhere. You talk about your local crazy personalities, whatever. He came back from somewhere. When I say that, he'd be on the road all the time. Ted was a salesman. He went out and sold like the regular guys. And he came back and says, hey, I saw this show in Ohio called Dialing for Dollars. We show a movie and people send in cards and we pick a card and we read their name. We call them at home and say, are you watching our movie? And if they say yes, you ask them how much is in our Dialing for Dollars jackpot, they win it. And as usual, Tush, can you do that? I said, well, I can do it, but I'm doing everything else. Now I'm going to host a movie. Well, I go to lunch. I come back from lunch. My news desk is pushed over to the middle of the studio, and they're tearing out the wall that was behind me. I said, what are you doing? They says, Ted wants to do Dialing for Dollars. So we're going to build a little studio out there that'll be the Dialing for Dollars studio. They're tearing out the wall. And then it was my job to find somebody to be the host. Well, we found a guy, a waiter, who's an actor, really nice guy. And came up to him and said, now you got to realize this is like a week's time passes. We hire him, Jerry Homan. He says, Jerry, would you like to come on and be the host of Dialing for Dollars? And he said, I don't know anything about it. I said, well, come in and we'll audition you. And he came in, he did the little audition, and he was good, very personable, good-looking guy. And we said, all right, you got the job. You're the host. Again, this is like Thursday or Friday. Come into work Monday, get called up to Ted's office. I don't want to do Dialing for Dollars. I changed my mind. That's stupid. Okay. We got Jerry working for us. We tore out the wall. What do we do now? I don't know, fix it. So go downstairs, and the production director says, well, we could fix the wall. What are we going to do about Jerry? So I got a call. I said, Jerry, I got kind of good news and bad news here. I said, we're not doing Dialing for Dollars. He's like, oh. I said, but you still got a job. You're going to work in promotions. And he said, okay, I don't know anything about that. I said, don't worry, you'll get paid. It's not like being a waiter. So we gave him a job in the promotion department. And this was at the time the unknown comic was getting to be, was doing all his shtick. Do you remember the guy with the paper bag on his head and he come out on the Gong Show? And genius here. I says, I got an idea. I go over to Jerry. I says, how'd you like to be the unknown newsman? He says, what's that? I said, just wear a bag on your head and we'll call you in to do reports, and you're the investigative reporter, which of course he was, there was no investigation because we didn't have any way of doing, we never wanted to do stuff like that. But he'd come on and do silly news stories, always wearing the bag on his head. And one time we did a takeoff of the wrestling where you always had masked wrestlers, and somebody would always try to rip off his mask. Well, right in the middle of the newscast, one of the camera guys comes in screaming, who are you? He's like, wait a minute. And I'm going, what's going on? What's going on here? And the guy's going, I got to know who you are. And he jumps on Jerry and knocks him off the chair, and they go behind the desk and they're fighting. You hear all this fighting. You see the paper bag fly up in the air, and it goes back down. And meanwhile, Jerry's down on the ground changing bags. So he comes back up on the set. We had two other guys pretend to be security guards and get that guy off the set. We bring Jerry back up, and he's dusted me off because he's worried my suit got dirty. Don't worry about me, unknown. We always called him unknown. Don't worry about me, unknown. I said, are you okay? And his bag, meanwhile, had red paint all over it and Band-Aids. It was all wrinkled. And the worst thing for Jerry, I'll never forget this. Talk about my parents seeing my pictures. Newsweek did a story on Ted Turner in Atlanta is starting a 24-hour news channel. And they had two pictures side by side in the article. Okay. One was the first serious reporter CNN ever hired, a guy named Daniel Shore, who was from CBS, who was retired from CBS. We hired him to be the senior reporter for CNN. It was a picture of him interviewing Jimmy Carter, dead serious. And the picture next to it was me with Jerry as the unknown newsman. And the caption was something like, can Ted Turner go from this to this? And I got a kick out of it. I'm in Newsweek. And Jerry's like calling his family back in Nebraska saying, I'm in Newsweek. And they're going, where? He said, look in the back. That's me with the bag on. They're like, no, it isn't. Yes. So his big claim to fame in a national magazine, just, him with a bag and nobody could tell it was him.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why you had to switch to the serious news, articles like the Newsweek article?
Well, think about this. If CNN would have debuted June 1st, 1980, with a guy with a bag on his head, do you think anybody would be watching it today? I don't think so. Come here, Daniel Shore. Put this bag on your head. You'll be much funnier.
But the brands, the fact that it was Ted Turner's company, but it was two separate
Well,
brands.
It started to develop into that. It started, us and them. And, we were such a cooperative, happy bunch of people. And now you got these news nabobs coming in, that were like, again, they took themselves seriously. This was the news. And, I was like the image of the station, and I was just, the crazy man. And so they kind of wanted to keep that totally separate. So I did the straight, serious news, and it was, oh, God, was that deadly. I'd get up at 3 in the morning. The crew was pitching in, and this is how bad it was, but we were trying to look serious. We subscribed to a weather service from somewhere, I don't know where. And what they would do, because they fed other TV stations, they would what's that called? The original fax machine had a spinning
telex?
thing. Well, yeah, telex, whatever. It was antique. And they would telex us every morning the weather forecast and how it was going to be, and they had a map. Now, we had a stack of maps printed that looked like their map, And the audio guy, one of his jobs before he went and set up the microphones was to take magic markers and color in the weather map. So we'd shoot it on camera and I would describe the weather. Well, let's take a look at our weather map, and as you can see, and it was just like this bogus little 8 by 11 weather map. And then we subscribed to the news service that Reese Schoenfeld ran out of New York. So we'd have feature stories, actual video of news stories, and they would send the intros. So I would just read their intros and we would run that. And we eventually built a really neat looking set. But in order to keep it away from the regular studio, because we were still doing commercials and stuff in the main studio, they built it a little room with a door that I would go in. There was a camera in there. And it was called the news closet, because that's basically what it was. I would have to climb in there. But on TV, it looked great. On TVs, you can do anything.
Did you think your job was in jeopardy at that point?
Never. Not back then. Fast forward about 12 years. No, because, it was like, I had, well, this is really jumping ahead. In the 1970s, there was a newspaper in Atlanta called Creative Loafing. And it was one of these free papers they'd give out every week. And they did an article on me. And again, this is when the early morning news and stuff first started. And it was catching on. And in the article I said, I'm having a great time, but who knows, I could be out in the street tomorrow. Okay. Again, this was in the mid-70s. Well, Ted came in my office, and he had a copy of that. He says, Bill, I read this article. Here, I wrote something for you. And he circled that paragraph about being out in the street with a pencil, and he drew a line down the bottom with an arrow, and he wrote down there, not unless I am first, Ted. And I still have that in one of my scrapbooks. Now, when I say jump ahead, when I left the company in 2001, after 30 years, I got one phone call, and it was from Ted. And he asked why I was leaving, and I told him 9/11 happened. There was no more entertainment news in New York. I was going to work doing nothing. I just decided time to move on. And his words to me, I understand, I'm out too. And it's like what he wrote in the 70s came true.
We'll talk a little bit about your relationship with Ted Turner.
Well, when I first met him, he was a guy that, he was 35. I was 25. He was this guy that owned a local TV station. He wasn't any powerful man. He certainly wasn't anything like he is now. He owned the TV station, which was a broken down operation. I mean, you talk about just lucky we got things on the air. Transmitter used to go off all the time. The chief engineer used to sleep in his office because when we went to be 24 hours a day, he had to keep that thing running. And it would go off, and we had a bell that used to ring through the whole building. It meant the transmitter was off, and you'd see the engineer running back to get it on the air. And, and again, Ted was just a guy that owned the station. He was always a regular guy. And as time went on, things got bigger and bigger and bigger. We went on satellite, and somebody sent him a wizard's hat. Like in Fantasia, the thing that Mickey Mouse had, except this had satellites and stars painted on it. It was purple and had a little satellite on top on the pointy end. And he's in the hallway, standing there wearing this hat. And he says, look what somebody sent me. I'm like, oh, that's nice. He said, you know what? He said, I get more and more people asking me now. I said, what do I think of, the ecology and the world and, what's going on today with pollution and this? He says, I don't know what to tell them. I says, just say, I don't know. And he thought that was funny, and he walked away. But then you think now his whole life is nothing but philanthropy, and that's all he does is out to save the world. And as I always tell him, yeah, you're trying to save it because you own most of it.
Do you feel he's changed much? Do you?
Nah, still the same. Still the same. Funny. I mean, he was talking. He spoke at my stepdaughter's college a couple months ago, and she wanted me to come so she could meet Ted. You know, so I went up and introduced her, and she got a kick out of that. But he was speaking, you know, and he was really good that day. And he was talking about Rupert Murdoch. You know, he said, "Yeah, he said, you know, everybody talks about us fighting and this and hating each other." He said, "We finally made up." He said, "We're friends now." He said, "We had lunch in New York and we buried the hatchet." He says, "Not in each other's head." He said, "We just buried the hatchet." But he still does stuff. Like, he just says stuff that just, he's very funny. Very funny. And he does, to this day, I don't know if he even knows he's that funny. You know. But it's not the same guy that crawled under the table at the America's Cup race. I don't know if you ever saw that famous piece of footage or not when he won the America's Cup. Him and his crewmates were all smashed. Smashed! And they're up in Rhode Island at that very staid yacht club. And there's a press conference, national press conference. He's like leaning back in the chair and everything else. Because they just started, as soon as they won the race, started drinking. Yeah, he doesn't do that anymore. That's still one of the funniest pieces of film around. We were all watching it when it happened in Atlanta. And we're dying laughing. Next day, it's like all these stick in the muds. How dare he show up and do that? You know, like, come on. Just won the biggest prize of his life, for God's sakes. You know, it's not like President Ford getting loaded going, hey, or Reagan going, hey, I got that wall down. You know? So, yeah, he's still a lousy dresser. He's always been a lousy dresser. I said to him one time, I found out the other news guys, this is when I was doing the crazy news, but I was doing everything. I was hosting the movies, I was doing the commercials. I found out that other stations, people on the air got clothing allowances so they could look good. You know. And so I said to him, I says, do you think I could get a clothing allowance? He said, we're about the same size. You can have my old suits. I says, I don't want your old suits. Yeah. Well, I used to sleep in them in the office. That's why he was always wrinkled.
How did the Bill Tush show
That was
come about?
the Tush show. The Tush show came about like everything else. He came back from lunch one day. Somebody told me this is on YouTube or Google or one of those things. I don't know. He came back from lunch one day and he calls, well, his secretary called. Ted wants to come down and do an interview with you. I said, about what? She said, I don't know. He just came back from lunch. So I said, all right. So I go into the production department. I says, Ted's coming down. We used to have a thing called Ted Alert, meaning he was going to come down and do something. So we just had to be ready because his attention span is 5 seconds long. And I says he's coming down to do some kind of an interview. So they set it up, him and me. And I says, well, here we are with Ted Turner. And Ted, I don't know, what's on your mind? I don't know what it was. He says, I want you to do a show. I'm like, okay. He says, it's going to be like a variety show. He says, it could be variety, it could be comedy. He says, I don't care. We'll put everything in it. I'm like, he says, you can do that? I says, yeah, I can do that. You know. And then he starts talking to me about money. He said, what kind of money are you making? You're not making any money here. He goes, I said, yeah, I know. He says, I'll pay you $100,000 a year to promise you'll never leave. I says, of course, back then I'm like, wow, that's, yeah. Well, actually, right now it sounds pretty good. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I won't leave. And he was really silly. As I said, it's on YouTube. You know, he's talking about my car. And he said, you're driving a Ford Pinto. I'm like, oh, that's all I can afford, you know. And so that's how the show started. You know, we got done with it. We had the tape, and I shook his hand. It's on camera of me never leaving. And I went back to the production director and says, well, what are we going to do now? He said, I guess we're going to do a show. And we had no clue what we were doing. I mean, it was a far cry from the early morning news show to where we were now, you know, going to try to be serious to do a comedy, which makes no sense, but that does make a lot of sense. And we put together this staff of people. It took us almost a year to get everybody together. And we found this trio, Bonnie and Terry Turner, husband and wife, and a young girl named Jan Hooks. They were doing a lounge act in some club in Atlanta, one of these dinner theater things, you know, where Bonnie Turner played the piano, I think Terry played the guitar, and Jan, then they did comedy routines. They had never worked in television in their life, and we hired them. And then we had about 6 other people that were local actors and wannabe writers. And we started cranking this show out. It was called Tush, which was a kick for me. And we had the logo design, my name, and now it was big time. You know, geez, I went from doing this crazy newscast and we promoted the heck out of it. I mean, it was dead serious stuff. And I mean, I was scared. I was the front guy. But it goes back to this day, I get emails from people, and I get people that remember Tush, and they talk about how it was groundbreaking, and you know, for this station in Atlanta to be doing a 1-hour comedy show every week, and we had all these different characters, and we pulled it off. But man, it was a lot of work. And you know, I'll be honest with you, if you ever see any of these shows back, I don't know where you'll see them back, but if you ever did, I got them. But anyway, if you ever saw them, I'm like so far in the background on most of them. I introduce things, and then I disappear. I played some characters. A couple characters I liked a lot. I played a guy named Captain Space. It was a takeoff of old space shows. I loved him. But the brunt of the work was by all those other guys. And it goes back to what Jack Benny once said. Somebody said to him, they says, you know, a lot of these people on your show are funnier than you. He says, yeah, but what's the name of the show? It's the Jack Benny Show. So whenever people tell me about how funny Jan was or how funny so-and-so was, they always say, yeah, we watched the Tush Show. And I'm like, yes, you did. Thank you. So, you know, it was heartbreaking when we had to end it after a year. We did 22 episodes, 1 hour a week. Now, you think, oh, well, that's not that hard. But when you're in, you know, you're not any of the big networks, you're not any of the big production companies that can crank it out like sausage. They know how to put everybody together that fast. We didn't know what we were doing. And for the fact we ever got it on the air just amazes me. And then Ted changed his mind and says, there's a lot of theories on why the show ended. 2 of the main ones are it cost too much money and the staff was huge. But of course everybody did everything. They wrote it and acted in it. The other one was there was this religious fella, Jerry Falwell, that would call Ted's office every Monday morning. The show aired on Sunday night. And he would call and complain about seeing sketches that he found offensive. And we never did anything offensive. Never. We went out of our way because Ted didn't want any of that. You know, so in this day and age, try and be funny without, you know, you watch 2.5 Men, the things they get away with. You know, we could have never done that. You know, but one day word came down, Tush is over. And he wanted a sitcom. Now there was a disaster. We did a pilot for a sitcom that was so stupid and so unfunny. Again, I was the lead guy. It was a takeoff of WKRP and what's the one about the television? Well, the Mary Tyler Moore Show. It was sort of a combination of them. Jan was like the women's lib kind of girl in the office. I was the station manager, and it was terrible. So we decided to do this sitcom, the pilot, and I'm going, this isn't funny. And the executive producer said, just shut up, we're doing it. Okay. Well, to really make matters worse, who do we invite to sit in the bleachers and be the live audience? Everybody from the sales department. Now, these are the people that are going to have to go out and sell it. So they're going to have the most critical eye of anybody. I suggested we come Saturday morning and get the wrestling fans and make them the audience. They'll laugh at anything. Heck, most of them are there with a fifth of whiskey anyway. They go, hey, that's funny. And no, we have the sales department, and you got to make them laugh. And we didn't. We'd do the jokes, and they're all sitting there. So the end of the thing, when it got done and we got to the final punchline and the lights went down, we all went around the set to the back of the set and hid until the audience left because we didn't want anybody yelling at us. Then we all went to our neighborhood bar and fought with each other for 4 hours on whose fault it was. It never got on the air. Never got on the air. And again, you say, was my job in jeopardy? I get a memo in the mail, not in the mail, on my desk from second in command. And he wrote, Ted wants me to advise everyone that when Mike Douglas goes on vacation in LA from the talk show, that Bill Tush will replace him. Mike Douglas was a very famous talk show host in the 60s, and he made it through the 70s. I mean, he was on par with, the Oprahs, but his was a fluff show. Him and Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin, they were the two big daytime talk show hosts. His last job was with CNN to do a celebrity talk show. Well, I don't know what the politics were, but they weren't happy with Mike, and he was a very nice man. The next thing I know, I'm on a plane going to LA, and I'm taking over this talk show from Mike Douglas, who in 1965, when I was still in high school, went to the county fair in Pittsburgh, and he was the headline act. And I was there with my girlfriend and another couple watching him sing his major hit, The Men in My Little Girl's Life. It's a corny song, but it sold a lot. But anyway, here I am replacing this guy. And, next thing I know, they call me. They said, you enjoying doing the show while he's on vacation? I'm like, yeah, I'm having a great time. I'm in LA, I'm in Hollywood. And he says, all right, you're in, he's out. Hey, welcome to television. And Mike never came back.
What was the name of that show?
People Now.
Now, had you seen Mike Douglas doing it before you went on?
I think I did, yeah.
But
he was doing it, he was still doing the Mike Douglas show from the 70s and the 60s. I mean, he had the chairs with the gooseneck microphones. There were 5 chairs for the guests, and and then the crummy set. God, that was a horrible set. But it was the early days of CNN. I'm surprised there was a set.
Did you make changes when you became?
I did. The show went through its ups and downs. I mean, it was like, they're canceling the show. Now we changed our minds. Oh, yeah. And I hate to say this is typical, but this is typical the way things were. They had this wall built in the studio, which was basically an office. CNN's original LA bureau was an office. And they took one office and made it into a studio. And they put up these curtains and a wall and everything. And I'm looking behind the curtains one day. And I says, that's a view of the Hollywood Hills out there. You've got all of Hollywood out there. Why are we covering it up? And everybody's like, we don't know. I said, well, let's make it a set. That could be our background. Everybody's like, oh, there's a great idea. So the next thing I know, we built this beautiful set, and had Hollywood behind us, and had the Merv Griffin studio. Was right across the street from, and so it was in plain view when you got up. So we started doing a Merv watch, because Merv did a talk show too in the afternoons. So I'd be in the middle of an interview with somebody, because I tried to put the comedy stuff back. And I'd be in the middle of an interview, and one of the crew guys would come up and say, Bill, we think Merv Griffin's getting out of his car down there. I said, excuse me for a moment, we have a Merv watch. And would take a handheld camera and go to the window and would point it out into the parking lot of his television studio. He had a huge theater, and would be there. Okay, the man in the blue suit, I think that's Merv. Is that Merv? Can you zoom in? No, that's not Merv. Okay, and then go back and do the interview. And these guests, these people that are promoting their TV shows are like, what is this all about? They never got it yet.
Did you ever hear from Merv or his people?
No, never did. Never did. I don't think anybody was watching it. But we, like I said, tried to insert the comedy into it. And I always liken it to the fact that when David Letterman did his morning show on NBC when he first started, he was on like at 10 in the morning. And he bombed. But then they put him on at night. He's doing the same shtick. It's funny. See? Well, we were doing that. When we were doing it at 3 in the morning, and you have no idea what condition the audience is in when they're watching it. It's funny, but you're doing it at noon. People aren't up for that. So we did the show for about, I guess, I don't know, maybe close to a year, maybe less, and then one day, one of my favorites. I had a girlfriend in Atlanta. I was divorced from my wife. I had this beautiful girlfriend. I was madly in love with this woman. Madly in love with this woman. And she's living in Atlanta. I'm living in LA. I'm doing the plane ride. And I think that might have had a lot to do with the demise of the show. I was never fully focused. And I would fly back to Atlanta, take the red eye on Friday nights to be with her for the weekend. On Monday morning, back way before 9/11, go to the airport at the very last minute for a 9 a.m. flight, run through the terminal, run through the jetway. They'd be holding the door open on the airplane. I'd fly into the airplane and sit down, just making it. They go, God, Bill, you just made it. It became a gag, because I was doing it every week. I'm madly in love with this woman. And I get a call. I'm sitting in my house in, believe it or not, above Sunset in Beverly Hills. And I get a phone call, 10 o'clock at night, and it's Bob Wussler. Bob was the president of CNN under Ted. And Bob had a great, former CBS president. He calls me, Bill, it's Bob. Hey, Bob. 10 o'clock at night. 10 o'clock LA time. He says, show's over. I'm like, what? He says, we're not going to do the show anymore. You got any questions, call me in the morning. Click. I'm like, show's over? I just lost my show? And I'm saying, so I call my girlfriend. I'm devastated. I call her, no answer. This is pre-cell phones. I'm thinking, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Where is she? I call her best friend, Mindy. Mindy, where's Sharon? She says, I don't know. If I hear from her, you want me to have her call you? I'm thinking, why are you going to hear from her at 1 o'clock in the morning? 15 minutes, I get a phone call back. It's her. I said, where are you? I can't say. She was with another guy. So I lost my show and found my girlfriend cheating on me in the same night. It's like, okay, here's one more. So the next day I'm driving around. My dad, of course, was in the casket business, and somewhere over the years he gave me one of those stick-on funeral signs, those magnets. I put it on my car, and I'm driving around all day with a funeral sign on my car because I was so depressed. So, and then that pretty much wrapped up. Then I stayed in LA for a year. By this time, I went from being Mr. Cable. This was, it's like somebody was sticking pins in my dirigible. Where's the dirigible? He doesn't. That's all right. I'm taking my hand out. So anyway, I'm thinking there. It's going. Okay, now I lost that show. What am I going to do now? Now I'm thinking, now things are getting scary. And I called and I says, look, they says, no, you're staying in LA. And for a year, I worked for CNN. They gave me a title, lifestyle reporter. I was not allowed to do any entertainment news whatsoever because there was a fellow that was doing entertainment news for CNN, and he was very close to the bureau chief, the guy that ran the LA bureau, and this guy was borderline nuts. He was one of these tyrannical, crazy people, just go nuts. And they wouldn't let me do any entertainment news. I mean, if a star came up to do an interview with this guy, they made sure I didn't get anywhere near him because the guy might know me and say, hey, Bill, what are you doing? So I was miserable for a total year. I sat in LA doing nothing.
What is even a lifestyle story? What does that mean?
That was exactly it. What is a lifestyle story? I'll tell you what a lifestyle story is. A Japanese fella that lived somewhere out of Atlanta, or out of LA, one of those towns. I never, to this day, don't know. They'll go, yeah, he's in the valley. I'm like, where's the valley? I don't know the valley. Must be down somewhere again. But anyway, I go to this guy's house, and he was a dentist or a doctor, a very nice guy, but he collected rocks, and he studied rocks. And I'm supposed to go and interview him about the studying of rocks. And this is so out of my league, I don't know anything. So I'm talking to him about his rocks. He's got a house full of rocks. And big rocks, little rocks. He says, here, put your hand on the rock. Feel that? He says, think of the years, the time that have gone by, water rushing over the rock and under the rock. And I'm going, oh, yes, this is very interesting with your house of rocks. And don't get your rocks off, I told him. And so as I'm leaving, I get done with the story. Well, I find out the guy is going to be moving. So I did some kind of a joke about the movers. I think, boy, are they in for a surprise when they come here and find Dr. Nikiwaja's rock collection. Here, box these suckers up. Anyway, he goes, Bill, it's so nice for you to be here. And I'm like, thank you. And he was a very nice man. He says, please, I'd like you to have this rock. He gives me this 50-pound rock. I'm like, well, thank you. Now I'm carrying this rock around for the rest of the day, And I remember we used to all meet upstairs in this restaurant and bar after work. It'd be a group of us, and at the CNN building. And I took my rock up and put it on the bar. Everybody said, what are you doing with that rock? And somehow when I moved from LA, my rock didn't make it. Now there was a pet rock. That was a real pet rock. And that was after the pet rock craze. See, my timing sucks. I could have made a fortune, me and Dr. Yashigumi. Oh, well, what are you going to do?
So then how did you get to showbiz today?
Oh, well, here we go, as fate would have it. I finally talked them into getting me out of L.A. By this time, TBS had grown, and, to put it to the point, there was no place for me anymore. I couldn't be the announcer anymore. I couldn't. The one thing I did hang on to was my Academy Award theater. I hosted the Sunday morning movie. I would come on and talk for 2 minutes about the upcoming movie, and I did that forever. I did that from the beginning. And what happened was, they says, well, you can come back to Atlanta. And there was no talk of firing me. I was still getting paid. And I came back to Atlanta. I had no job. I had nothing to do. I mean, I didn't even know where to go. I'm just there. And I come into work one day, or I come into the building, I come into work, came into the building, and somebody says, "Oh, Don Lennox is looking for you." Don was a producer at CNN. And I went and looked for him, and he said, "Let's take a walk out in the parking lot." So around the parking lot, he says, "How'd you like to move to New York?" I'm flashing back to Ron Lundy and Midnight Cowboy. I'm thinking, yeah. He said, "We're starting a showbiz show, and you could be the male anchor." And I was only in Atlanta 2 days, never unpacked my bags. Bam, I was on a plane, flew to New York, and we started showbiz. And now I was the anchor of the showbiz show. And that's how that happened.
Why did CNN decide to do a showbiz show?
Well, because people realized, I think a lot of it came from Ted, because he hadn't bought MGM yet, but you know, I think a lot of it came from him. And Entertainment Tonight was really, you know, busting some heads. And it was like silly that we weren't doing any entertainment news on CNN except these little blurbs here and there. So we started doing Showbiz Today, which of course everybody, you know, said, "Oh, it's like Entertainment Tonight." It's like, well, it was. You know, they're all the same. You know, we tried to say, no, we do it with a news angle. No, but we're still interviewing the same people, you know. You know, it just became a showbiz show. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, the LA Bureau started adding people. New York started adding people. Atlanta had all the people that put everything together and put the show on every day. And I was Mr. Serious. Again, you know, I wanted to have some fun with it, but you know, when I was anchoring the show, it was myself and a lady named Liz Wickersham. And we, you know, did the show. And in the beginning, when Don Lennox was the executive producer, wanted to cover everything. And I'm not kidding. I mean, there's an old joke about, oh, they'll cover the opening of an envelope. Well, that's what we did. And we were at every single party that you could imagine, you know, that had nothing to do with showbiz. Why we did it, I don't know. But I think just to get into the parties. And so then the show eventually changed, you know, and it ran. God. Then they changed anchors. That was another thing. Again, I think I always believe it was some people at CNN that just didn't want me on the air there, because I still brought back the memories of, you know, the early morning news and the dog and the unknown newsman, you know, all the funny stuff. You know, you still had the powers that be in Atlanta that I think said, well, you know, we're doing it because of Ted. And but I hung in there, and then what happened, they changed anchors somewhere. They brought in a new executive producer, and he wanted to show his clout. So he brought somebody in to be the new anchor. And I continued doing the Showbiz Weekend show, which we turned into something I had more fun doing. It was more me. You know, we'd go out on location, and they never reined me in, which I was surprised, because I would still get out there and do some crazy stuff that nobody else on CNN would try to do, you know. Now they do, because they're striving to change their image. So I think Larry King did a show with a dog the other day, trying to get those ratings up there. Anyway, where do we go from here?
I want to ask you about some of the stories that you covered during your time as the senior correspondent.
Yeah, well, you know, there's the depressing story, the sad stories, the Rock Hudson AIDS thing, you know, how they flew that helicopter over his gurney when he came back from, I think, Paris, you know, and they're wheeling him in. I mean, that was sad, you know. And when we first started the show, the We Are the World song had just come out. That was a big, big thing. When you think back at, you know, all that we did, because we did the show like, I don't know, 20 years? Was it 20 years? You know, any major entertainment event that happened in that time, you know, we did. And the end of it came when 9/11 happened. That was all over with.
Before we get to that, though, were there any scoops that you specifically
You have to
had?
talk to him. I can't remember. What scoops did we do?
scoops.
We didn't have
You
any.
just interviewed a lot of celebrities and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I did.
You kept true to your.
Yeah, I didn't
roots.
do investigative stuff. There were no Japanese people with rocks that were worth me digging up, so to speak.
You look behind the fourth wall a lot.
Well, yeah. I look behind the fourth wall.
What does that mean?
Well, a dear old friend of mine who I've known for a long, long time, Gary Shandling, when he was doing It's Gary Shandling Show, says we break the fourth wall. And I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but of course I was going to pretend that I did. That's when you let the audience in on the action. In other words, this is just pretend here, you know. The Marx Brothers were the first ones to do it in the movies, where Groucho would just be talking and come out right out of character and look at the camera and say something, which nobody did. And they're like, whoa, that's crazy. But he broke the fourth wall. And that's what we used to do. I mean, we'd go behind the scenes of everything, and we would go on location of a movie they were shooting, and unfortunately never know what the plot of the movie was, because we were just there. And then it turns out to be some of the, neatest movies around that we were privy to. We went on location. We got a call from HBO. They says, look, and we were tied in with HBO because it was Time Warner, and they says, we're starting a new show. Would you like to come and cover it? And we're like, okay. And our booker, the lady that would put everything together, she said, it's the show they're doing at Silver Cup Studios called The Sopranos or something. And we went over, talked to David Chase, talked to Lorraine Bracco. I played pool in the Bada Bing room with Stevie Van Zandt. Most of the cast. The only one of the cast that didn't talk that day was James Gandolfini, which he still doesn't talk. Because he's not comfortable doing interviews, which, it's his privilege. At least he's smart enough not to do them. I mean, we've interviewed people that do them and can't put a sentence together, So at least he says, no, I'm not going to do that. But we didn't have a clue what The Sopranos were. And on the way out the door, I remember looking in the garbage can and seeing a script just thrown out. And I picked it up and I'm reading it, and I said to Adam, our producer, and the crew, I said, look at this script. And I said, listen, look at the words. You dirty, lousy mother. I'm going, they're actually going to be saying this? It's all written out. I just thought it was funny. Like an idiot, I gave it to my wife, and she sent it to her cousin in Georgia. Oh, here's something Bill found. You might like it because you like this kind of stuff. I just gave away a script of The Sopranos. We did Sex and the City when they first started. No clue what that was about. Gosh, I mean, it's just, we really made some inroads. It was, and it went from nobody knowing who. When we first started doing the Showbiz show, CNN wasn't even known in New York. And we would go on location of like a soap opera. And we would be there, and as soon as we start to shoot, all the union camera people and stagehands at the soap opera would start conveniently dropping things and walking in front of us and this and that, and I had to stop, say, can these guys stop this? And I'm thinking, excuse me, this is how my career started. Now I'm asking them to stop? What is, But the Showbiz This Week show was fun because it wasn't in the same mold as everything else on CNN.
Talk a little bit about your process of interviewing celebrities.
I'll tell you, my process is, there is no process. I mean, I just would start talking. And I remember interviewing John Candy one time. And we got done. He says, that's it? I said, yeah, that's it. We're done. He said, well, you didn't even. He says, I did one of these last week. He said, I'm sitting there with a guy, and the guy's just saying, gee, John, I really enjoyed your movie. It was a great movie. And the cameraman says, okay, we're rolling in 3, 2. And the guy said, but I really think you're very funny. We're rolling? we're here with John Candy. John, tell us about, and John's like falling out of his chair. I just start. I don't, if there is an intro, it's hi, we're here talking, but, I always used to say, hey, we edit it together, so I'm not going to go through all this rigmarole here that's unnecessary.
Would you do a lot of background?
As much as there was. The other thing was, too, I watched Charlie Rose interviewing Dennis Hopper the other day, reran one of, and I thought, what a great show. Because he got to sit there for an hour and just have a conversation. Just the two of them. And all we ever did was 6 minutes, 8 minutes, because, in the back of my mind, I knew when it got on the air, it was going to be 3 minutes long. And think about this. You talk to somebody for 3 minutes, you're going to get a major scoop out of them, So your new movie, you play a killer who goes underwater and commandeers a submarine and kills everybody in it, right? Yeah, that's true, and I took a skin diving course, and I learned how to do that, and of course, we had a lot of extras. There is some computer work in that. Very good. Tell me about that woman you're cheating with on your wife. How do you do? You can't do that. What? And then how do you edit that in the piece? Meanwhile, besides the movie, he's cheating on his wife. So that's the way I handled all that.
What were some of the interviews that stood out to you?
Good or bad?
Both.
Ooh, good. I like, this is a boring answer. I'd say most of the people, 99% of them, were really nice people, and they knew they had a job to do, and they would do it, except Tommy Lee Jones. He was the toughest guy, and it wasn't just me, it was all the other people that interview him. We do these things called press junkets, where you come into the hotel room and you're one of 40 people, and you come in and you're asking the same questions. You got 6 minutes, they got 6 minutes, and you go in there going, okay, but everybody used to say, oh, Tommy Lee Jones, please, anybody but Tommy Lee Jones. And I had my son with me one time. My son was about 10 when Tommy Lee Jones did that Batman movie. And my son had the press kit, which has the pictures and stuff. And he says, you think Tommy Lee will sign this picture for me? I'm like, John, I'm telling you, I don't know. I says, because he's not easy to talk to. So we go into the room. My son's with me, standing behind, over in the corner with his picture of Tommy Lee. And it's a typical Tommy Lee interview. Well, so you're in Batman. Your character gets to do this and gets to do that. It must take a lot of work, or is it fun to do that? Yeah, it's all right. And so you're moving on to another movie where you play Cobb, Lee J. Cobb. Not Lee, he was the ball player. Ty Cobb. You're going to play him. Do you research baseball for that? Yeah, sometimes. Well, thank you, Tommy, for talking to us, and take care. And then I said, what the heck? I says, do you mind, my son's with me, and he has a picture. Would you sign it for? And I thought, oh, he's going to scream and yell and storm out of here. I said, would you sign it for my son? He says, sure. Where is he? I says, over there, John, come here. And he came over, and Tommy like, what's your name, son? Doggone it, I'll sign this for you. He was the nicest guy in the world. He gives him the picture. I'm like, I can't believe that.
Was the camera rolling?
No. Yes, and he is a nice guy. But out of tape again.
Oh, you can continue.
Oh, but I'm trying to think, Robert De Niro is a sweetheart. Tries so hard, and he's gotten better, I must say. But when he first started doing interviews, he didn't want to do them. He doesn't like small talk, but the studio talks him into it, so he has to do it. And finally, one time and I was fortunate in the fact that he used to watch the Showbiz show, my show, on the weekends. so he knew who I was, so I kind of had an advantage. But one time he came in, he goes, "Oh, we got to do this again," you know. And I said, "Look, I'm going to make it easy, okay? This is nothing hard." So they're rolling. I said, "So tell me about your character. I mean, how easy can you get? So tell me about your character." He goes, "Well, ask me something else." So, I mean, you know, but as I said, he's gotten better over the years.
All right, let's stop there and
All right.
change the tape.